Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Story 1. The man on Route 2, I used to work night shift as an ER nurse at Providence Sacred Heart in Spokane, Washington. 12-hour shifts, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 3 or 4 nights a week depending on the schedule. My apartment was about 40 minutes out, off Highway 2 heading toward Newport, near the Washington-Idaho border. I liked the drive, honestly. After a shift full of alarms and fluorescent lights and other people's worst nights, there was something calming about that stretch of road once you got past the city. Dark pine trees on both sides, no streetlights, just your headlights and the yellow line. This was October of 2023. I remember because I'd just turned 29 that September, and my coworkers had gotten me a cake with a typo on it that said, "Happy birthday, Aaron," which we all thought was hilarious enough that somebody took a picture and it became my phone background for a while. I'm telling this because I still don't have an explanation for it. Not a full one anyway. And it's been almost 3 years and I still lock my car doors the second I get in, even in my own driveway. It was a Tuesday night, October 17th, and I was driving home a little after 7:30 in the morning. My shift had run long because we had a multi-car pileup come in around 6 a.m., and I stayed to help get everyone stabilized before the day shift took over. So I was more tired than usual, running on the tail end of an energy drink from around 3 a.m., wearing my scrubs still because I hadn't bothered to change, just thrown my hoodie on over them. The sun wasn't up yet. That time of year in eastern Washington, sunrise is close to 7:45, so it was still that deep blue-black dark, cold enough that my windshield had a thin layer of frost I'd had to scrape off in the parking garage. My car at the time was a 2015 Honda Civic, silver, with a bad heater that took about 15 minutes to actually blow warm air, so I was driving with my hoodie sleeves pulled over my hands on the steering wheel, waiting for it to kick in. About 20 minutes into the drive, right around where Highway 2 narrows down and the shoulder gets thin before you hit the turnoff for Diamond Lake Road, he was standing on the shoulder, facing traffic, one arm out with his thumb up. Nothing unusual about that in itself. You see hitchhikers out that way sometimes, usually guys heading toward Newport or Priest River for work, backpackers, occasionally someone who'd clearly had their car break down. What struck me wasn't that he was hitchhiking, it was that he wasn't dressed for it. He was wearing a white button-up dress shirt, tucked in, dark slacks, dress shoes, no jacket. It was maybe 38 degrees out. He looked like he'd walked out of an office, except there's no office for 15 miles in either direction out there. His hair was neat, parted on the side, and even in my headlights, I remember thinking his posture looked wrong for someone hitchhiking. Hitchhikers usually slouch a little, look tired, look like they've been standing there a while. He was standing very straight, almost formal. I didn't stop. I want to be clear about that up front because a lot of these stories, people stop, and I think that's usually where it goes wrong. I didn't stop. I slowed down a little out of instinct, the way you do when there's a pedestrian near the road, and I looked at him for maybe 2 seconds as I passed, and he turned his head and looked directly at me. Not at the car, at me. And he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. I want to describe it accurately because I've thought about this a lot. It was the kind of smile you do when you're performing friendly without actually feeling it, like the muscles remember the shape, but nothing behind the eyes moves. My grandmother had early-stage Alzheimer's before she passed, and near the end, she used to smile at people the same way. Pleasant, correct, but empty. That's the closest comparison I had. I kept driving. I didn't think much more about it right away, just filed it under a weird thing I saw, the way you do with a lot of things on a long solo drive. I got home around 8:10, showered, ate a granola bar, and passed out by 9. I want to skip ahead now because the next part is what actually starts the story, if I'm honest. The hitchhiker himself on his own isn't really the scary part. It's what happened over the following 2 weeks. 6 days later, October 23rd, I was driving to work, this time in the evening, around 6:45 p.m., already fully dark, and I saw him again. Same spot, more or less. Maybe a quarter mile further down. Same white shirt, same dark slacks, no jacket, even though by then it had dropped into the low 30s some nights. Thumb out, standing straight. I remember my stomach did something uncomfortable, a tightening, before my brain even consciously registered why. Then it clicked. The shirt, the posture, the spot. I slowed down again, and again he turned and looked right at me before I'd even really decelerated, like he already knew which car it was, and he did the same smile. I did not stop. I drove straight to work, and I told one of my coworkers, Danielle, about it during our dinner break around 11 p.m., mostly as an odd anecdote. She laughed and said maybe he was doing some kind of social experiment, or maybe he just liked that shirt. I laughed too. It felt like a normal explanation at the time. Then on October 29th, a Sunday, I saw him a third time. Different circumstances this time, which is the part that started actually scaring me. It wasn't on Highway 2. It was at the gas station on Highway 41 in Newport, the Chevron near the bridge, where I sometimes stop to get coffee before my shift if I'm running early. I pulled in around 6:15 p.m., and as I was walking in, I saw him standing near the ice cooler outside, off to the side, not buying anything, not doing anything, just standing. Same shirt. I remember the shirt looked less crisp this time, a little wrinkled, like it had been slept in, though he still looked otherwise put together, hair still neat. I froze in the doorway. He wasn't looking at me when I first saw him. He was facing the road, but I swear the second I stopped walking, he turned his head toward me. Same smile. I didn't go in. I got back in my car and drove straight to work without coffee, and I sat in the parking garage for a few minutes before I went inside because my hands were shaking too much to trust myself walking past the ambulance bay. That night at work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about how he'd turned to look at me exactly when I stopped, like he could feel me watching even though his back had been turned. I know that sounds like something you'd talk yourself into after the fact, and maybe I did, but at the time it felt very immediate and very real. I told my roommate named Priya, who I'd known since nursing school, and she was the first person who took it seriously instead of laughing it off. She asked if I'd considered that it might not be the same guy. Maybe it was a coincidence. Similar build, similar clothes. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But there was something about the face I kept recognizing. Something about the shape of it, a slight asymmetry to how his mouth curled up more on the left side than the right. That's not something you misremember by accident 3 times. Priya suggested I take a different route to work for a while, just to see. So for the next 4 or 5 shifts, I did. I went the long way, down through Elk and cutting over, adding almost 25 minutes each way. I didn't see him. I started to relax a little, actually, and told myself Priya was right. It had probably just been an odd stretch of coincidences, a guy who genuinely lived out that way and hitchhiked for whatever reason. Then on November 9th, I saw him in my apartment complex parking lot. I want to slow down here because this is the part that changed everything for me. I got home from my shift around 7:40 a.m., pulled into my usual spot, and as I was gathering my bag off the passenger seat, I glanced up and he was standing at the far end of the lot, near the dumpster enclosure, just standing there. White shirt, no jacket. It was 34 degrees that morning, I remember, because I checked the weather app before leaving work. I did not get out of I sat there gripping my bag, trying to decide what to do, and I watched him in my rearview mirror. He wasn't moving. He was just standing, facing my car, and even from that distance, even with the mirror, I swear I could tell he was smiling. I called Priya, who was already awake, and she came down and walked out to the lot with me, and by the time we got outside, he was gone. No car, no sound of footsteps, nothing. The lot backs up to a wooded slope that goes down toward the highway, so I suppose he could have walked into the trees, but it had only been maybe 90 seconds between when I first saw him and when Priya came down, and I hadn't taken my eyes off that spot the entire time except to dial her number. We called the apartment if there was any security footage for the lot. There was one camera, angled mostly toward the entrance gate, not really covering the dumpster area. The property manager, a guy named Kyle, pulled it anyway and let us see it. You could see a shape at the very edge of the frame around 7:41 a.m., mostly obscured by the angle, but it's just a smear of a figure, no detail. Then nothing. He said maybe it was a resident taking out trash, and honestly at the time I wanted to accept that because the alternative was worse. I didn't sleep that day. I stayed up with every light on, and I called my mom, and I didn't tell her the full story because I didn't want her to worry, but I asked if I could maybe come stay with her and my stepdad for a few days, and she said, of course. I drove out instead of going to work. I'd called in, telling my charge nurse I had a family emergency, which felt like a lie and also felt completely true at the same time. For about 10 days after that, nothing happened. I stayed at my mom's. I picked up a few shifts covering for people at a clinic closer to her place just to have some income, and I started to think maybe it really was over, whatever it had been. I remember specifically feeling embarrassed telling my mom the story when I finally did tell her, because saying it out loud in her kitchen in daylight with coffee going, it sounded thin. A guy in a white shirt. That's it. That's the whole scary story. I felt a little unhinged even bringing it up. Then on November 20th, my apartment to grab more of my things, planning to stay a few more days at my mom's before deciding what to do long term. It was late afternoon, around 4:30 p.m., already getting dim with how early it gets dark in November up there. I let myself in and everything looked normal at first. My apartment, my stuff, nothing obviously disturbed. But there was a smell. Faint, but there, like a mix of dry cleaning chemicals and something sweeter underneath, almost like hand soap. the kind you'd get in a public restroom. I didn't recognize it as belonging to anything in my apartment. Priya had moved out to her boyfriend's for the time being too, so it wasn't her. I walked through feeling stupid for how loud my heartbeat felt in my ears. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken, but in my bedroom, on my dresser, my hairbrush had been moved. I know how that sounds, a hairbrush, but I'm particular about where things sit. It's a habit from working in a hospital where everything has a place, and I know for a fact I'd left it angled against the mirror, bristles down, the way I always do. It was lying flat, bristles up, dead center on the dresser. I left. I didn't even grab the clothes I'd come for. I got in my car, and as I was pulling out of the lot, I saw him one more time. The last time I ever saw him, as far as I know. He was standing across the street from the complex, on the sidewalk near the bus stop, not doing anything related to a bus. White shirt, same as always. Though by then it looked genuinely dirty, grayish at the collar. He didn't smile this time. He just watched me drive past, turning his head slowly to track the car the same unhurried way he always had, and then I turned onto the highway, and he was gone from my mirror. I filed a police report. I want people to know that, because a lot of these stories, people don't, and it always bothered me listening to other accounts, wondering why not. I did. Spokane County sheriffs, since the incident spanned across a couple jurisdictions, took the report. A deputy came out, looked at the apartment, took a statement. There wasn't much they could do. No forced entry, nothing stolen. A moved hairbrush isn't evidence of a crime. He told me, kindly I think, that hitchhikers on Highway 2 weren't unusual, and it was possible I was seeing more than one person and connecting them subconsciously, which people do, especially under stress. He wasn't unkind about it. He just didn't have anything to go on. I never found out who he was, or if the man at the gas station and the man in the parking lot and the man who moved my hairbrush were even the same person. I've told myself all the reasonable things. Maybe it was 2 or 3 different men who happened to look similar. Maybe the hairbrush thing was me misremembering how I left it. Maybe the smell was something mundane I've since forgotten. Maybe fatigue and night shifts and stress made me see a pattern that wasn't fully there. But I moved out of that apartment in January of 2024, and I never went back on that stretch of Highway 2 after dark again, even years later when I moved back to the area for a different job. I still, to this day, 3 years later, do a full walk around my car before I get in if I've been parked somewhere for more than a few hours. I check my back seat every single time, without fail, even in broad daylight, even at my own house. The thing that still gets is the timing of that first sighting turning his head. I've replayed it so many times. I was still accelerating. I hadn't braked yet. There was no reason for him to know I was slowing down before I did, but he turned like he already knew. I don't have an ending for this. I never saw him again after that day by the bus stop. I don't know his name, I don't know where he went, and some nights I still wonder if he's out there somewhere, on some other stretch of road, waiting for somebody else's headlights to slow down. Story 2. The rideshare to nowhere. My name's not important for this. I'll just say I go by Marcus. I was 26 at the time, and I was driving for a rideshare app in Austin, Texas, mostly nights and weekends to supplement my day job doing its support for a property management company. This was the summer of 2024, June specifically, and Austin summers are brutal, the kind of heat that doesn't really break even after the sun goes down, just sits on the city like a wet towel. I'd been driving for about a year and a half by then. I had a system. I only picked up rides between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. on weekends, because that's when the surge pricing made it worth the gas. And I mostly stuck to a loop between downtown, Rainy Street, East Austin, and sometimes out toward the Domain if someone was heading that way. I drove a 2019 Toyota Camry. Gray, kept it clean because I figured cleanliness got better ratings. And I always had a phone mount on the dash and a little Bluetooth speaker I'd let passengers connect to if they wanted to play their own music. I want to set the scene a little because I think it matters. I was a pretty relaxed driver. I'd had drunk guys throw up in my back seat. I'd had a couple get into an actual screaming argument mid-ride. I'd had somebody try to convince me to drive them to Houston at 1 for triple the fare, which I declined. Nothing had really rattled me before this. I felt like I'd seen most of what the job could throw at me. The night this started was a Friday, June 14th. I remember the date because it was my little sister's birthday, and I texted her, "Happy B-Day, sis. Love you. Sorry I couldn't make the dinner," around 9:40 p.m. right before I picked up my next fare. The request came in from a spot on Rainy Street, one of those little bars with the string lights and the converted bungalow patios. The app showed the name Dale, no photo, which wasn't unusual. Plenty of people don't bother uploading one. I pulled up around 9:52 p.m. and a man got in the back seat. He was maybe mid-40s, average build, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, nothing remarkable. Short hair, clean-shaven. What I noticed first, though, before anything else, was that he didn't say hi. Most people at least mumble something. Hey, how's it going? Even drunk people usually manage that much. He just got in, pulled the door shut, and I said, Dale? Just that. Flat. I pulled out into traffic. I had the radio on low, some indie station, and I remember thinking, okay, quiet ride, no big deal, some people just don't want to talk. I've had plenty of those. I didn't think anything of it at first. About 5 minutes in, stopped at a red light on Cesar Chavez. I glanced up at my rearview mirror out of habit. I do that at every light, just a quick check, force of habit from driving strangers around for a year and a half. And he was already looking directly at the mirror. Not out the window, not down at his phone. Right at the mirror, like he'd been waiting for me to look up, just to break the quiet. And he said, "It's not over yet," and then went back to just looking forward, not at his phone, not out the window. Just forward, at the back of my headrest, I guess, or maybe still at me through the mirror. I genuinely couldn't tell in the dark. I want to be honest that at the time I told myself it was a weird but harmless comment. People say odd things. I'd had worse. We got onto 35 heading north, and this is where it started feeling different. I noticed he'd taken his phone out but wasn't looking at it. He was holding it up near his face at an angle that didn't match someone reading a screen, more like the angle you'd hold a phone if you were using the camera. I couldn't be sure. The interior lighting was dim, just the dashboard glow and passing streetlights strobing through the windows. But it felt like he was filming, or at least it felt that way strongly enough that my neck started prickling. He said, "Just tired, long day," and lowered the phone into his lap. The Manor Road exit came and went, which struck me because his drop-off address was supposed to be near there. I glanced at the app, and the pin was still showing about 2 miles ahead, so I figured maybe I'd just misjudged where the exit was. New apps sometimes route you a little differently than expected, and I wasn't going to second-guess navigation over a gut feeling. Except then we passed the actual pin location. I watched it on the app, the little car icon slide right past the destination marker, and the route recalculated instead of ending, showing another 11 minutes added. He didn't answer right away. There was maybe a 4 or 5 second pause, which doesn't sound like much, but felt enormous in that quiet car. Just tires on asphalt, and my own heartbeat suddenly very loud in my ears. Then he said, "No, keep going." That's against how the app is supposed to work. Passengers aren't supposed to redirect you off the set destination without updating it, and I'd had riders ask for quick detours before, a drive-through, a gas station, but this felt different. His voice had gone flatter, if that makes sense, less effort in it than before. I said, "I can't really do that, man. I gotta follow the app for insurance reasons," which was true, and also just felt like the safest thing to say. I did not take the next right. I kept driving straight, following the recalculated route back toward his actual pin, and I felt my hands go cold on the wheel despite the heat still radiating off the asphalt through the floor of the car. I didn't respond. I kept my eyes on the road and I sped up a little, not dramatically, but enough. We were maybe 4 minutes from the actual drop-off at that point, back on service streets, passing gas stations and a Whataburger with its lights still bright at almost 10:20 p.m. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the ride. I pulled up outside the address on Manor Road. A duplex, dark, no porch light on, no other cars I could see in the little gravel driveway. And he got out without a word, shut the door, and just stood on the sidewalk, not walking toward the house, just standing there watching my car as I pulled away. I watched him in my mirror until I turned the corner. He never moved. I ended the trip on the app, my hands still shaking a little, and I sat in a gas station parking lot on Airport Boulevard for probably 20 minutes just breathing, telling myself it was over. He was just a weird guy. Plenty of weird people use rideshare apps, and I'd done the smart thing by not taking that detour. I want to skip described every single detail of what happened after that first ride. This would be twice as long. I'm going to focus on what matters. 4 nights later, June 18th, I got a rider request again from Rainy Street. Same starting location, almost to the exact spot. Name on the app this time was different. Marcus, which unsettled me immediately because that's my own name. And I remember staring at my phone for a full 10 seconds before accepting, telling myself it was a coincidence. Plenty of guys are named Marcus. I should have declined. I know that now. I didn't, because I told myself I was being paranoid, that Dale and this new Marcus fare had nothing to do with each other, that I was pattern matching out of anxiety. I pulled up to the same man got in the backseat. Gray shirt, different one this time, dark jeans, same blank expression. I said immediately, "I'm not doing this ride, man. I'm sorry, I'm going to cancel." And I reached for my phone. He said, calm as anything, "You already accepted." Which was true, technically, but that's not why I hesitated. I hesitated because something about how quickly and evenly he said it made my skin crawl, like he'd anticipated the exact words I'd use and already had a response loaded. I hadn't confirmed anything. I hadn't said a word about the first ride. I hadn't given any indication I recognized him beyond just not wanting to drive, but he said it like a fact, not a question. I unlocked the door, get out, and he did, eventually, taking his time about it, unhurried in a way that made the whole thing feel worse than if he'd argued. Before he shut the door, he leaned down and said, "I know where you drop people off," which didn't even make sense as a sentence in context, but it's the line that stuck with me the longest out of anything from either ride. I reported both rides to the rideshare company that night, called their safety line, gave them the trip IDs, everything. They told me they'd investigate and could confirm the rider's account, but for privacy reasons, couldn't share identifying details with me. A representative did call me back about 8 days later and said the account associated with both rides had been suspended for policy violations, but wouldn't elaborate further, no matter how many times I asked what that meant or whether it involved a police report on their end. I stopped driving nights after that. I switched to only daytime rides for about 2 months and eventually stopped driving for the app altogether that August, going back to just my IT job full-time. Here's the part I never fully explained to anyone, even Priya, wrong story, even my own girlfriend at the time, Alicia. About 3 weeks after the second incident, I was leaving my apartment complex off East 51st Street around 7 a.m. for work, and there was a gray Toyota Corolla parked across the street that I didn't recognize. Nothing unusual on its own, except it pulled out right when I did and stayed about 4 cars back all the way to my office parking garage downtown. I couldn't get a clear look at the driver, sun visor down, and once I pulled into the garage, it just kept going straight past the entrance. I never saw that car again, as far as I know. I never saw the man again either. I don't know his real name, I don't know why my own first name showed up on his second account, and I never got an answer from the rideshare company about what the policy violation actually was. I changed my daily route to work after that, started varying it day to day instead of taking the same streets, which felt paranoid and probably was, but I did it anyway, and honestly still do it now, 2 years later, in a different city. Alicia used to tease me about it a little, gently, and I never really explained the full reason, just told her I liked variety. The line that still gets to me, more than the car following me, more than any of it, is, "You remembered me," because I hadn't said anything to indicate that I did. I hadn't so much as reacted with my face, I don't think. I've gone back over it in my head so many times trying to figure out what gave it away, and I still don't have an answer. I just know he was right. Story 3. The Detour off Route 9, I grew up outside Keene, New Hampshire, and by 2025 I was 24, living in a small rental house just off Route 9 near Chesterfield, working as a delivery driver for a regional grocery chain that did home deliveries out of a distribution warehouse in Brattleboro, Vermont, just across the state line. The job had me driving a box truck on set routes through rural Cheshire County and into southeastern Vermont, dropping off grocery orders to houses that were sometimes miles apart from each other, a lot of dirt roads, a lot of places without real addresses so much as descriptions. The blue house past the second bridge, that kind of thing. I liked the job well enough. Quiet, mostly solitary, good enough pay for the area. My shifts usually ran from about noon to 8 or 9 p.m. depending on the route length, and I drove alone the entire time, which I liked. I'm not a big talker. This happened in February of 2025. So everything was snow, ice, that particular gray New England winter light that starts fading around 4 in the afternoon and is fully dark by 5:30. I want to be upfront that I don't fully know what I saw, or if there's a mundane explanation for all of it, because unlike a lot of these stories you hear, mine doesn't really have a person doing anything overtly threatening. It's more that something felt wrong the entire time, in a way I still can't fully articulate, and one specific night still bothers me enough that I avoid a certain stretch of road even now. It was a Thursday, February 6th, and I remember the temperature because it had been announced on the radio that morning, -4 degrees, with wind chill making it feel closer to -20. My route that day ran out toward Westmoreland and then looped back down along Route 63 before connecting back to 9. I had 6 deliveries left around 5:45 p.m. when I saw a man standing on the shoulder of Route 63, no houses visible nearby in either direction, just snowbanks and dark tree lines in the road. He had his thumb out, hitchhiking, which struck me as strange immediately just given the temperature. You don't stand outside for long out there in that cold without serious risk, and he wasn't dressed like someone prepared for it. Jeans, a flannel jacket that looked too thin for the weather, no hat, no gloves that I could see. I slowed down out of a mix of concern and habit. You don't leave someone standing in -20 wind chill without at least checking if they're okay, even if you're not going to give them a ride in a company truck, which I wasn't allowed to do regardless. I rolled my window down a couple inches, just enough to talk, and said, "Hey, you doing okay?" He said, "Car broke down about a mile back." His voice was calm, unbothered, which struck me as odd given how cold it clearly was. No shivering, no tightness in his voice, nothing. I told him I wasn't allowed to give rides in the truck, company policy and insurance, but that I could call it in for him, get someone out there. He said, "That's all right. Someone's coming," and just nodded like our conversation was finished and looked past me down the road. I drove on because there wasn't much else I could do, but I called it into my dispatcher anyway, gave a rough location, and she said she'd pass it to non-emergency dispatch just in case. I finished my last few deliveries and didn't think much more about it. A stranded motorist in bad weather isn't exactly a horror story on its own. 2 deliveries later, around 6:20 p.m., I turned onto a dirt road off Route 63 called Wilder Hill Road to drop off an order at a farmhouse set back a couple hundred yards from the main road, one of those long gravel driveways that badly needed plowing, my truck fishtailing a little on the ice under fresh snow. I remember the delivery address because it was for a family named the Osgoods, and I delivered to them a handful of times before, always friendly, always left a note with instructions about their dog. I saw someone standing near the tree line off to the side, maybe 30 yards from the house, not moving, just standing in the snow facing the driveway. It was dark enough by then that I mostly just had a silhouette, but something about the build, the posture, made my stomach drop before I could even consciously place why. Same general height, same slightly forward-leaning stance as the hitchhiker. I told myself it couldn't be the same guy. Wilder Hill Road was a solid 3 or 4 miles from where I'd seen him, on foot, in that cold, in under 40 minutes. It didn't make sense. I finished the delivery, knocked, dropped the bags per their instructions since nobody answered right away, and drove back down the driveway. When I glanced toward the tree line again, whoever had been standing there was gone. I finished my route, nothing else happening, and I mostly forgot about it, chalked it up to a coincidence and bad lighting playing tricks, a stump or a fence post my brain had turned into a person, which happens more than people think when you're tired and it's dark and cold enough that your mind starts filling in shapes. The next incident was about 10 days later, February 16th, a Sunday. Different route than usual because I was covering for a coworker who'd called in sick. This route took me back out along Route 63 again, and around 5:50 p.m., almost the same time of day as before, I saw a man on the shoulder again, roughly the same stretch, maybe a quarter mile off from where I'd seen him the first time. I slowed down again, and this time as I got closer I realized it was, as far as I could tell, the same person. Same general build, same too-thin flannel jacket, though I couldn't be certain given the distance and the dark. He had his thumb out again. I did not stop this time. I didn't roll the window down. I just kept driving, faster than I probably needed to, and in my side mirror I watched him turn his whole body to track the truck as I passed, slow and deliberate, not the quick head turn of someone just watching traffic go by. I called dispatch again, told them the same guy seemed to be out there again, and my dispatcher, a woman named Carol who'd been doing that job for something like 15 years, said something that stuck with me. She said, "Honey, there's no houses out that stretch for 2 miles either direction." I hadn't even told before. I don't think I had anyway, though maybe I had without fully registering I'd said it. Either way, it rattled me that she'd landed on the same unease I was feeling without me pushing her toward it. I kept driving my route as normal for the next several weeks and didn't see him again, and I genuinely started to let it go, the way you do with things that don't have a clean resolution. You just stop thinking about them because there's nowhere for the thought to go. Then on March 3rd, a Monday, I had a delivery scheduled for a house on Wilder Hill Road again. Not the Osgoods this time, a different address further down. A family who'd just moved in a few months prior. First delivery I'd done for them. It was around 6:40 p.m., fully dark, light snow falling, the kind that swirls in your headlights and makes the whole road feel smaller than it is. I pulled into their drive this time, closer to the road, and as I was getting the delivery bags out of the back of the truck, I heard footsteps in the snow. Not from the direction of the house, from the tree line off to my left, that same crunching, deliberate pace, unhurried. I turned, and there he was, maybe 20 feet away, standing at the edge of where my headlights reached, half his face lit, half in shadow. Same flannel jacket. This close, I could see his face clearly for the first time, and what struck me most was how ordinary he looked. Not gaunt, not wild-eyed, nothing you'd flag as dangerous if you passed him in a grocery store. Just a regular-looking man, maybe mid-30s, brown hair, a couple days of stubble, standing very still in the snow with no coat that would keep him warm, no visible breath clouding in front of his face, despite it being roughly 15 degrees out, which I noticed distinctly, because my own breath was fogging heavily right in front of me. And my voice came out steadier than I felt. He didn't answer. He just looked at me and then looked at the truck, at the open back doors, at the grocery bags I was holding, taking his time studying each thing like he was cataloging it. And he just tilted like the question didn't make sense to him and said again, "You're going to be late." in the exact same tone, no inflection change at all. I grabbed the bags, walked quickly to the front door, dropped them, and didn't wait for a response, just went straight back to the truck. When I turned around to get back in the driver's seat, he was gone. No footsteps retreating, no sound of him moving through the snow, nothing. Just gone, the way the first figure by the tree line had been gone. I sat in the truck for a solid minute, heart going hard enough I could feel it in my throat, and then I drove straight to the end of my route. Finished the last 2 deliveries faster than I probably should have, hands not quite steady on the wheel the whole time. I told my manager about it the next day, mostly because I wanted it on record somewhere, and he said he'd flag the route for the safety team, but that without a license plate or anything concrete, there wasn't much to be done beyond keeping an eye out. He did mention, almost as an aside, that a different driver, I never got the name, had mentioned something similar out near that same stretch a year or so before I started. A man near the tree line who didn't seem dressed for the cold, though he said he figured it was probably a different story getting exaggerated through repetition, coworkers talking, that kind of thing. I don't know if that's true or if he was just trying to make me feel less alone in it. Either way, it didn't make me feel better. And after that night on Wilder Hill Road, I switched off that route permanently about a month later, told my manager I preferred the Vermont side deliveries instead, which was true enough on its own that I didn't have to explain the real reason. The detail that still bothers me the most, more than any of the sightings themselves, is the lack of breath. I've turned it over so many times. 15 degrees, no visible breath, standing that close to me. Every single other time I've been out in weather like that, you can see your breath the second it leaves your mouth. It's not subtle. It just wasn't there. I've tried to explain it to myself a dozen different ways. Maybe the angle of the light. Maybe I just didn't notice in the moment because I was scared. Maybe my memory of it isn't accurate anymore after replaying it so many times. I don't have a resolution for this one either. I never learned who he was, why he was out there, why he said what he said, or what late was supposed to mean. I still do deliveries in that area sometimes, different roads, and every winter when it gets properly cold, I catch myself checking the tree lines a little longer than I probably need to. That's it for tonight's stories. 3 different states, 3 different situations, 3 people who, as far as I know, still don't have an answer for what actually happened to them. If there's one thing that connects all 3 of these, it's not a jump scare, and it's not some big reveal. It's that feeling every one of them described, that split second where your gut tells you something's wrong before your brain can explain why. Aaron slowing down on Highway 2. Marcus checking his mirror at a red light. The delivery driver noticing there was no breath in the cold. None of them could prove anything in the moment. They just knew. And that's honestly the part that gets me the most, sitting here putting these together. There's no clean ending in any of these. No arrest, no explanation, no closure. Just 3 people who moved, who changed their routines, who still check their backseat or avoid a certain stretch of road years later, and the rest of us left wondering right along with them. If you've had something like this happen to you, a hitchhiker, a rideshare that felt wrong, someone who just wouldn't stop showing up, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and some of the best stories on this channel started right there in that. If this video kept you up a little later than you planned tonight, that's exactly what we're going for. Hit subscribe if you're new here. There's a bell icon if you want to know the second a new story drops, and I've got another one of these coming very soon. Stay safe out there, and maybe don't pick up that hitchhiker. I'll see you in the next one.